Welcome everyone to today's active learning techniques workshop. I've run this about I think this is the third time I've done this workshop, and I really enjoy teaching this one, partly because it's active, and that's partly what we'll get into. Is active learning tends to be, at least in my experience, more fun for not just the students, the learners, but also for the teachers. So welcome. So why don't we don't have a ton of time because we're only meeting the once, but in a regular class, a key part of what makes active learning work well is that students feel like they're in a safe community where they kind of know each other. So it's more difficult to get students to actively engage if they feel like they don't know anybody or they're unsure. So why don't you go ahead and just in the chat, type in a quick hello to your fellow learners here and let us know what you teach and maybe where you teach. There they come in. Great. So if my eyes go up, it's because I have a monitor ahead of us here. I'm not looking at the clock, although I probably should be watching the clock. Just in a virtual environment, sometimes people are wondering, like, where are your eyes going? I'm looking at your chats just a little bit above, so I can also still see your faces. So we have folks from social work, School of Graduate Psychology, audiology, Eugene, school district. Kelly, do you work with our School of Learning and Teaching?
No, I work with kids. You mean in the school district? Sorry.
No, I'm just sort of curious where you teach, what your affiliation is at Pacific University.
Oh, in special education.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually got my my teaching degree at Pacific 15 years ago.
Well, welcome
So,
home.
yeah, it's great. I'm gonna meet with Jesse tomorrow, and he was our tech back then.
Lovely. Yes. Wonderful. So we're seeing lots of representation from all across the institution, which is really exciting. I'm happy that you're all here. And happy that we're all ready to embark on, an autumn full of learning, let's hope. I'm teaching a course on joyful learning. And so I'm asking my students every day that I take roll, what's bringing you joy today? So I'm just going to follow through with that because it's so lovely for us in my class. We'll see how it feels for you all. Type one thing into the chat that's bringing you joy today, and I will pull up my slides. Let's see. Let me try one more time. There we go. All right. Snoring dog. Isn't that the best? My daughter has a cat that snores. She's a very small grandma cat, but she's very tiny and she has the smallest little snore. It's adorable. Lovely drive. Former colleagues. Lovely. Students are feeling less overwhelmed. That's true for my students too. And that is very joyful. Sunshine. Yes. While we got it, we got to love it. Hey, we got 2 sunshines, 3 sunshines. Yep. Awesome. 4 sunshines. Aw. Baby's talking. What a lovely joy. Thank you for sharing that with me. I'm going to have all that as I go forward. This is the beautiful thing about joy, right? You just get to, like, everybody has it and enjoys it. Lovely. Thank you so much for sharing. So I'm going to go ahead and start the slideshow now. And we'll just work through this. There's going to be, as you might not be surprised to hear, there will be opportunities for you all to actively engage with this workshop as I talk about the topic, but also as you get to sort of see some activities in motion. I also really encourage you, if you have other like approaches or techniques that are similar or that work as well, or something that you might expand, please let us know, because then that just makes bigger our repertoire of ideas that we can use to make learning more active. So I have a chat for you here. This is something that you might ask students to write down. It might be something that you ask them to do in a poll, perhaps. But this case, because we're in a virtual environment, we're doing the opening activity of a think and post is what I call this one. So here's your prompt. What does passive learning look like? So you're working for like a student who is being passive in their learning. What might that look like? So go ahead and post that in the chat when you have a sense of that. The chat says just reading, sitting and listening or watching the teacher. It's interesting that you say, Kelly, without an expectation. I hadn't thought about that before, but letting them know that we expect you to do something else is really interesting. Something I hadn't been intentional about before. Sitting back and listening, being talked at, and then just repeating that back, right? That's passive. Great. All right, if you have other thoughts, drop those in. Everything they need to know is on the slide, in which case, why would they need to be in class, right? Closed to input, right? Being taught. It really surprises my students when I tell them I can't teach you anything. I can, however, create an environment in which you can learn, you can build knowledge for yourself, but I can't like make something happen in your brain. That always like, they have just a second and think about that, which is exactly what I'm trying to get them to do. Right. Wonderful. All right. So here's the next prompt. What does active learning look like then? It's kind of an activity of defining what it is and what it isn't, or what it does look like and doesn't look like, is very powerful for students. So what would active learning look like? Group discussion, an experiential learning activity, yes. Hands-on, raised hands and sharing ideas, even just that you can tell they're listening to you, is very helpful. Engagement in a discussion, being engaged. Thanks, Joaquin. Right. Doing the pre-reading, how about that? You can tell that they've accessed those resources. That's actively learning. Again, engaging with the materials. So there are multiple components to this. Like, what are they doing with each other? What are they doing in the room? But what are they doing outside of the room? That active learning might be something that happens before they come into the class, right? Wonderful. Variety of responses. Just letting them know that there are a variety of responses can sometimes be very engaging to students, that you're not waiting for them to say the right answer. Wonderful. Awesome. Thank you all. So we're going to play a little game. Anytime you can include play of any kind in your class. If we have time at the end of the workshop, I'm going to show you all a very fun online tool that I just used in my class today that students like absolutely adored. I didn't know it was going to go as well as it did. It was great. So I'll share that with you if we have time. So passive or active, okay? So I'm going to show you a description, and you have to wait until I say go. And as soon as I say go, you write active or passive in the chat, okay? Do you understand the prompt? Okay, here we go. Copying notes from slides during a lecture. Passive or active? Ready? Go. So the reason I ask you to wait until, it depends, right? I ask you to wait until I say go. This is really important for students because you're all professors. You probably would put your own thinking in here anyway. But students very often, especially if it seems like it's binary, then they'll think that they've got the wrong answer and they'll wait to see what everybody else said. So making a little bit of a game where they all have to put it in at the same time can be very helpful. Most people think this one's passive. All right, let's see the next one. Oh, I went too far. Hold on. Responding to a poll during a lecture or presentation. I like how Zara's like, it depends. Yeah, for sure. We're going to come back to that one. Responding to a poll. What do y'all think? Ready? Go. Active, active, active. Yeah, generally that does get them activated. Joaquin, you thought that was passive. Could you say why? Not that that's a wrong answer. I'm just curious what you're thinking.
You would think I would have the Zoom thing down right at this point, 3.5 years in. I don't know. I'm not sure I see that any different than taking notes.
Uh-huh.
Because you're responding to a prompt, right? So so from my end, I don't see a qualitative difference between responding to a poll prompt versus taking notes.
Right.
And I wrote passive for the first one, so I'm trying to be consistent.
Jen, I like yours a lot. I'm sorry to tell you all. I think that I'm going to have to give Jen's answer of moo the answer. That's great. The best. So I think it comes down, Joaquin, as you're pointing out, like to, well, it depends, right? We're going to come back to that as we look at the other ones. Okay, here we go. Let's keep going. Get ready. Comparing solutions or answers or responses with a partner in class with permission of the instructor. Let me just say, ready? Post. Right. It still depends. Chad thinks it depends too. Right. Now, okay, I'm going to come back to that one. Hold on. Ready? And move. Right. Good. Taking a multiple choice quiz or exam. Post. Try to give people a second to think about that, but not too long. This one always gets really mixed responses when I do this. It's fascinating. All right. All right, I think we have one more. Yes. Okay. Ready? Here we go. Last one. Error analysis or some other post-mortem activity asked for a quiz or exam. 3, 2, 1, post. Hey, we got Shauna to commit to one. That's exciting. I can't actually see your face, Shauna, because of the way my thing is set up. So I can't tell if you're laughing at my jokes or not. Yes, it can tell you are now. I've scrolled across, so that's good. Awesome. So, oops, hold on, I went too far. Oh no, I've really gone. Okay, so as you all point out, it depends a lot. When I first built this workshop, I was trying to come up with something that would be clear cut. And that was very informative for me because I realized that it always depends. Now, rote copying word for word what you have written on a slide is not maybe as active as talking with students about, with another student about, well, why did I get this answer, but you got that answer? And I think that this answer is right because. Now, if they just looked at what'd you get, what'd I get, and they don't talk about it, or they don't actually compare, if it's just sharing but not comparing, there is definitely a lower level of activity, right? All of which is more active. Frankly, all of these are more active than just sitting and doing absolutely nothing, right? Not being asked to process what they're getting in any way other than what they might do within their own mind. So what we're going to talk about today are things that are more obviously active or that they have a tendency to fall toward that end of the spectrum. Multiple choice quizzes or exams are often vilified and we're told don't use them because they don't actually require any critical thinking. But that depends entirely on the nature of how the questions are built. So how a lot of them end up being built, they tend to be more passive. You're just trying to guess the right answer. But there's a lot of research out there about question formation. Okay, so thank you for that. Move on here. So I'll talk a little bit about what, the resources say active learning is and how it helps students. So the definitions I've found, there are many, but this is sort of a coalescing of them. that active learning, they tend to think of these like as is helpful. I also think to think of them as strategies or activities. So strategies we might apply as instructors, and activities that we might create and invite our students to participate in, that require students to do something. They have to do something in order to construct that knowledge. So this comes very much from a constructivist framework, that you are actively constructing knowledge. A learner must actively construct knowledge. And or monitor and adjust their understanding, which is arguably part of that construction process. So the activities that will ask them to connect to prior knowledge, to incorporate new frameworks, to bring multiple examples against a rule, that's all sort of construction of knowledge. Anytime they're monitoring or adjusting their understanding, a poll can be really useful for that. So even if it's very informal and nobody's going to get a bad grade if they get it wrong, they will know immediately if they got the answer right or not, and they'll know immediately if they're following along, if they are tracking the understanding or not. And then the other thing that's a really important point here is that in active learning, students engage in higher order thinking, including metacognition. So this is going to be that Bloom's taxonomy, where they're not just remembering, but that they're actually starting to be metacognitive. They're thinking about, how am I thinking? What kinds of, why do I think that? What sorts of, when did I get confused? What sort of strategies am I applying here? How is this different from the thing I did before? So active learning engages all, like those three main ideas of constructing knowledge, monitoring understanding, and engaging in metacognition. Those are like the three big ones. And Joaquin, I see your comment. Isn't number 4 the outcome of passive or active learning? Let me see what number 4 was. Taking a multiple choice quiz or exam. Well, this is the question, right? Is it just an assessment, an instrument to assess knowledge, or is it also a learning activity? And I think that sort of depends on when and where it happens. But the kind of thinking that students must do, if the questions are constructed in such a way that a lot of critical thinking has to happen to differentiate between them, then folks can argue that that is definitely a more active learning. But it tends to happen at the end of learning, when we're using it as a summative assessment. You can also use multiple choice quizzes or exams as formative assessments, which we may or may not get time to talk about, but that's a really interesting approach to quizzing and testing. So here are some ways that active learning helps students to actually learn. I mean, we're all on the boat here because you're here, but here's, some specific reasons why. Just inserting some sort of activity that asks them to do active engagement with their learning often gives them a pause in receiving that information to sort of confirm or correct their conceptual understanding. So if they are not understanding the concept, it's really good for them to know that, so that they can then correct their understanding. If they're on track, it's also really good for them to know that, so they won't be spending cognitive energy trying to know, am I getting this or not? They'll like, oh, yep, I've got that. And they can use those resources to learn new things, right? Or to continue to deepen their understanding. It gives students an opportunity to engage in the social dimensions of learning very often. Many active learning strategies involve students discussing with the large group, or discussing with peers, a share, compare with peers, that engages that social dimension. And that is, in the literature pretty clearly helps with learning. It can give them a balance of listening and doing. Part of learning is listening to someone talk to you about a thing sometimes. You're engaging concepts anyway, you're encountering concepts, I should say. And often that's by listening to the instructor. But if you can balance that listening with that doing, then it can really help to keep them engaged, actively engaged. And just a change can increase attention. So if you're lecturing, that's fine, but stopping to have active learning interspersed in there is really useful, whether that's a poll or a quick pause and reflect on this, or turn to your neighbor and share your thoughts about it. That just a shift can increase that attention, and that's really valuable, especially in a longer class session or depending on other factors in the classroom. Active learning has been shown to make learning environments more inclusive. You'll have access to these slides. I'll send them along after the presentation, and there's just a little reference there to this one resource that talks about a little bit more about how active learning makes learning environments more inclusive, particularly for students who have had less practice sitting still and complying, right? Or who just don't have the same sort of frameworks for how does college work for a variety of reasons. So lastly, and I frankly think most importantly, it makes learning more fun for the students and for the teachers, in my experience at least. And then if people are having fun, then you have the positive effect in engaged, and that makes a really big difference to how learning goes. So, all right, so we have an activity because we're going to balance listening and doing. So my next activity is a pause and write. And so I'm trying to remember how, because it's been a while since I did this online, how best I got you this information in your breakout rooms, because I'm going to stick you in breakout rooms and let you talk about it. So if you have a second to write in a classroom, I would always make the students write it down because you're grown-ups, by which I mean adult experienced learners. You can make your own choice if you wanted to write it or just think about it. And then I'm going to have you share and discuss with your partners. So how might increased opportunities for active engagement support student learning in your specific contexts? As we talked about in the very beginning, it really kind of depends, right? So in your context, how would it help student learning if there were more opportunities for active engagement? Might be helpful to think about times when, the energy is sort of flagging in your class, or things that students tend to not take to as well, particular components of the way of what you're teaching that might be sort of activated with more of this kind of thing. So I'm gonna, y'all have the prompt. Does that everybody understand? So it's okay if you lose the slide. So I'm going to put you into breakout rooms, and it's going to be a brief share, like 5 to 6 minutes, and then I'll pull us back to the whole group. Does that make sense? Great. I'm seeing a couple thumbs up. That's good. I don't want to lose the slide before you're ready. Okay, so I'm going to stick you all in breakout rooms. Welcome back, everyone. We have 8 of 11 people back. 8 of slightly more than 11. There we go. All right, I think we have everyone back. It's always tricky. This is what I say about sometimes it's really good to run this workshop in person. In person, you can sort of monitor how people's, sharing time is going and whether or not it's time to end it or they need a little bit more time. But shy of sort of popping into every breakout room, it's a little bit tricky to know how to do that. You should know how things are going when you're in on a Zoom call. So let's just take a few minutes here. Oh, there's the timer. I also recommend setting a timer for active learning activities because it's very easy to lose track. So does anyone want to share how it went for their group? And this is where the new tool I found online is very exciting for my undergraduates, at least, which is a random name wheel spinner. You can just drop the roster of your students in and randomly click the button and it spins, and then it does the thing. So does anyone want to share voluntarily?
Sure.
Thanks, Kelly.
There. So we have very different kinds of classes. So did you want us to talk about each other's, or
Well, just what did you learn, or what you think happened in your conversation that could enlarge what we are talking about?
Well, I learned from Jen a couple of cool things called Kahoot, which is a polling app, and Poll Everywhere. And I assumed that when she started talking about polling that she was doing remote classes, and she said, no, it's in person. I said, well, how does that work? So she started talking about you could do it on your phone, and I have never heard of that, surprisingly. So I'm going to research that myself.
Right. Wonderful. Anybody else have a cool thing they learned from their partner? right, I think I have everyone. I'm going to do the random spinner just because it was a lot of fun for my students.
And I'm
So,
gonna avoid eye contact, see if that works.
can you say that again?
I'm gonna avoid eye contact, see if that works, right? If you don't pick on me,
It works so well. It's the absolute best way to get my attention is to
right?
avoid eye contact. Actually, I told my students last class, not today, but the 100% guaranteed way to get me to come over and talk with you is to either look bored or take out your phone. Because if you take out your phone, that cues me that you need me to come over and just chat with you and check in with you. And my freshmen were very happy to avoid that if they didn't want me to come over. So you'd be surprised as soon as I said, you know what, when I see that phone, I assume you're beckoning me over. And all the phones just went down and went away. They're like, oh no, we don't want that. It was pretty funny. So, all right, so we're going to do this fun thing just because it's really fun. Let me show you. Can you all see? I haven't shared it yet, so you probably can't see it. Oh, and I also have to share the sound too, because that's the fun of it. All right, can you all see my spinning wheel? Yeah, I could tell by some people are smiling. Oops, let's see. So here we go. This is what I did with students that told me they had to be prepared that for their group, anyone was going to maybe have to share out. And I borrowed this from team-based learning. So everybody needs to be prepared to share something about the discussion they just had. Either it was they were in pairs and some of them were in triples. So I said, it's not just the one person who wants to share. I'm going to spin the wheel. And if your name is the name that it lands on, you need to share out for your group. So they knew this ahead of time. And then all you do is push the little white button here. I don't know if you can hear that. And then there's applause and confetti. And I have to tell you, my students loved that so much. It was like the best thing. I had students who, from like the start of class, a couple of weeks ago, have been like not wanting to make eye contact, doing the Joaquin move, and staying in the back. And they were all laughing and razzing each other. And they're like, oh my gosh, it's going to be you. It's going to be you. Oh, it was me. And it was just very fun. So I mostly was just trying to come up with a way that students wouldn't feel like I was picking on them. And this ended up being so fun that they were really engaged with it. And then they all had to be actively learning in the session or in their pair because they knew everybody's going to have to talk about this and you don't know if it's going to be you or not. So everybody needs to be prepared to share out. And that could have felt like me being mean, but it ended up feeling like a fun game at the end. Like, oh, it could be anybody, so you better be ready. So I'm definitely sharing that along. So Chad, it was you. So do you want to share anything out?
No.
I didn't give my students that option.
Oh, okay. Well, let's try that again.
Try again.
So just so that I can focus, ADHD brain. What was the question again?
Yep. And this is also a very important thing about active learning is you have to remind them of the prompt, especially if you've gone off on a tangent, as I have done. So the prompt was, did you learn anything from your conversation with your partner about active learning strategies that might either help your partner's learning or might help your partner support learning or might help you support learning in your class?
Yeah. So what I learned from Shauna was, and I hadn't considered it this way, like one of the benefits of active learning is that big assumption here is that the students believe in themselves enough in their own ability to learn. If we incorporate active learning into how we present information, it's actually a more efficient way to teach. They can spend less time studying after class. They can spend less time, cramming for exams if we use active learning techniques. It might build that confidence so that they don't spend all night long cramming.
Right. That's a really critical point about that piece of confidence. How do we know that we're on track if we don't have opportunities to check our understanding? And talking with a partner, doing a quick poll, all of these sorts of active learning is a really good opportunity for students to find out if they're following along, if they're tracking, if they are understanding. And then they can monitor their own learning. And, you know, then almost always they're like, oh, actually, I understood this way more than I thought I did, or they understand it because they have a chance to have a conversation about it. And then they do carry that confidence forward into their own studies, which then makes that studying much more efficient. So really great points there. Okay, let's go back to the presentation. Hopefully you can all see that. I've got it on a giant screen. Hold on here. My screen sharing is paused anyway, so let me just stop the whole thing and see what I can do here. Because that's where I have things going. Multiple screens happening here. Okay. Let's try again. How about that? Can you all see that slideshow now? Great, thank you. And because I had to reset, we had to start over. Apologies. Yes, let's see. Okay, your specific context, excellent. That's what we just did. So here are some learning techniques. There are lots and lots and lots of them. And the goal of this workshop is to help you all start to imagine like how to activate all kinds of different learning, right? The whole key being that you want students to be constructing knowledge and confirming their own understanding and correcting that understanding, and give them lots and lots of opportunities to do that well before the summative exam, right? You don't want them to realize they didn't understand it once they've taken an exam that's going to impair their grade for the rest of the semester. You definitely want them to know that at point of need, so they can ask you clarifying questions, or they can get clarification from their peers really quickly. So anyway, here are 5 of my favorites active learning techniques, with the acknowledgement that there are many more. So my first one, whoops, I did 3 on accident, is what I call a pause and write, or a pause and talk. Generally if I'm the boss of the universe with students as I am, I'm like, you're going to write it down, because I know that their thinking is going to be clearer, and they'll have something that they can be confident about looking at to share off of. Most of the time working with professionals, faculty, I am sure that you all are confident enough to write it down if you need to, or if you feel like you can restate your thinking with confidence. But often students don't feel that way. And so if they wrote it down, if they forget what they were going to say, they can always look at what they wrote, and everybody has a response. It's a very powerful way to make sure that everybody can be included in a discussion or an activity. But pausing in the stream to have them write, which is like reflecting, checking their understanding, connecting to their own experience or their own learning. And then it gives them something to compare with a partner, and then to continue a small conversation. And then you can open up the bigger conversation as a really useful technique. And you can also just do a pause and talk depending on your student, on your learners and what they're like. A pair, compare, and share, or a pair, share, compare. Usually I like to do a pair, compare, and share, which is a little bit different from your standard pair, share, because I'm asking them specifically when they're in their session, not just to share what did you write for the answer, but compare your response to your partner's response, looking for patterns, for differences, for themes. And then when I ask them to share out, it's really about, and I let them know this, we're trying to get a sense of what our shared understanding is about this concept, and themes and patterns and similarities are all really an important part of that. So they aren't just being like, well, what answer did you get? It's really, what can we tell from what we're saying together that there might be some themes rising up? So it's just a little more active learning and a little more critical thinking infused kind of active learning. And I mean, it depends on the level of students you're teaching undergraduates. So they really need to have clear framing around the fact that you want them to compare their responses. Maybe students in a graduate program or other professional programs will naturally do this. So it really depends on what you know your students will do. But giving them an opportunity to compare their learning with their peers is really valuable for lots of ways. it can work against stereotype threat when they realize that their peers had the same questions they did or didn't understand it any better than they did. Everybody was struggling with it, or everybody's kind of getting it. So it really helps them. This, I have a feeling Kelly's going to recognize this. I do, we do, you do is a framework that the K-12 folks have been doing for a really long time. And it's really a scaffolded approach where you model as the, the person who knows how to do the thing, you model it. And then together, the whole class does it together on a sample. And then you ask students to either do it collaboratively with a partner and or to do it independently on their own. So it's really a way of them getting to see an example of either it's like maybe a thinking thing that you're doing, showing them how to apply a framework to a concept. It might be an actual skill like summarizing or highlighting or using a database, right, Angela? So you might demonstrate it, then you might say, let's all click through all the clicks together. And then you might say, all right, in a partner, you're going to try to find something on your own, knowing that eventually they need to be able to do it independently. That's one of my favorites. I use that in faculty development all the time too. Working with examples and models is related a little bit to the one I just said before. And this can be tricky the first time you teach a course, but if you ask for permission from your students, and they don't have to give it to you, but some of them probably will, to use their work, anonymized, of course, de-identified, in future teaching contexts, then you can have models and examples of the thing you're asking them to produce or to do. And that is so much easier for students to intuit what they need to do. I often use the metaphor, and apologies to anybody who's heard me say this before, but it's like we're asking them to build an elephant, but they've never seen an elephant. And so we try to describe to them in a rubric assigned with points for how many points they'll lose if they don't get this right. And we're trying to say it has a trunk. And they're like, I don't know, what the trunk I'm thinking of doesn't look like something that would go on an animal, right? So if you can just show them an elephant and say, show them several kinds of elephants. You're like, you're going to build your own elephant and it will have these common characteristics. That could be super valuable, especially anytime if you get them to rank, categorize, or analyze. This could be all the way from like, even like a patient report that you might write, or a case study, or a clinical analysis, or a paragraph summarizing, an article that they read for a class. So if you give them multiple examples, they can sort of when they start to rank and categorize, then like which one is the strongest and why? Then they have to really drill down into what are the criteria that you're really looking for in this product or performance. Some folks in pharmacy just did for us, they gave out last year, they did a workshop for our CETCI after hours pedagogy series. And they actually got a Target grant to build videos that are basically scenario videos. And they showed this is a good interaction. This is a better interaction in a pharmacy setting. And then they showed two, the not so great, and then the one that's like at the Target. And then students were able to compare those two and find the differences. And that was really valuable experience for them. And the students enjoyed it. And so it was really a great project. So if you're interested in learning more about that, let me know. And the last one, I got this from someone else. I'm totally like referencing, borrowing. He calls it making, shaking, and breaking the rules. And it comes from culturally responsive critical thinking is how he frames it out. But the basic idea is you give them, it's very closely related to models and examples. So you can say, well, what is the rule that governs these three things or this kind of approach? And then, well, which things don't fit and why don't they fit? What happens when you get one that breaks the rules, right? So this is really also helping students to understand how frameworks might work, also to understand criteria for performance or products. So asking them to look at a sample of things and say, well, okay, what do we think the rules are then for how this operates? And this can be applied broadly. So you'll have this link here when you look at the slides. And I really encourage you to take a look at his article because it's really interesting. It comes, I think this links back to A Cult of Pedagogy. If you don't know that, that's a really good blog to subscribe to. So here was our third activity. I'm realizing we only have about 10 minutes. So I think I might have us do this just in the chat So wanted you to sort of, or I can, invite folks, we could use the spinning wheel. Someone can share what they want, but thinking about a favorite activity that you already use in your teaching, or that you experienced when you were a learner. So that's like the first part. And the reason I put both of these prompts together is because I was going to send you off to do it. But if we're going to do this out loud together in time, I probably will have us look at one question at a time. But so it's like, what's a favorite activity? And how did this activity increase engagement or enhance learning, either for your students, if you were the teacher, or for you yourself as a learner? So it's sort of a two-part question. They do sort of say in best practice, you want to try to limit the number of like tasks that you give students in a single prompt, because it's very easy to get confused, particularly if they can't track it. So by watching a slide. So let's see. So let's start with the first one. What is a favorite activity that you use in your teaching or that you experience as a learner? So I'll give you a minute to just think about that. Meanwhile, I'm going to drop something in the chat for Nissan. Okay, so think about a particular activity you experienced. Normally, if this were with students, I would give them a lot more time for this, but we're moving along. So if you have it, thumbs up if you think you've got in your mind. This is also really useful. Thumbs. One of the reasons that nature gave us thumbs, so we can vote with our thumbs. So, all right, so you have one, right? So then think about the second piece. How did it increase engagement or enhance learning, either for yourself or your students? So how does this actually help? Like, what does it do? And so here's what I'm going to ask you to do, I think. This is Robbie making adjustments on the fly. But I think this will work out better. So go ahead and briefly type into the chat, what is the activity? And then if you can summarize it briefly, how it increased engagement. Should we try that? Let's try that as a written prompt this time. Thanks, Sarah. Okay. Interesting. So while others are typing, so Zara, it's they would respond. Are they responding out loud? Are they responding in writing, or are they responding with a photo or picture to a prompt?
Oh,
Those
yeah.
are both interesting.
I didn't mean with a picture, but just having a visual prompt rather than, as you mentioned, lecturing or more verbal. Just sometimes you're just switching that modality and just, however you want to say, using another part of your brain, or just maybe also, lessons anxiety or concern that I have to write this out right. I just think it awakens another sphere.
Well,
and it could be verbally or written, whatever.
Well, asking that it does engage the dual coding, whereas visual and text operate in different parts of the brain. So that can actually give a break to the text processing part of the brain and let the visual part of the processing brain do some of the lift. Great.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
Wonderful. So Joaquin, you say that you sort of do an I do, they do, I do, we do, you do model, role play, and have them do it on their own. And do you find that to be pretty successful, Joaquin?
Yes, I think students really enjoy that level of engagement. And I think it sort of takes off some of the anxiety, right? If you're trying to learn a new skill. Right. So yeah, you get to model it for them, right? Then role play, then, because this translates in sort of the parent training that we do with parents. Mm-hmm. So you model, role play, then they do it, but then you kind of reinforce that behavior, kind of shaping, right? Successive approximations to the target behavior that you want.
That's
kind of that hot cold game, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep, exactly. Wonderful. So Kelly, reluctant writers. My college freshmen are reluctant writers too, many of them. Use dictation and word prediction to write a few sentences. Interesting. And they have a voice that reads their sentence. Is that how that goes? Okay, so I have a question. So how do you keep them from, like, once they've seen that a computer can, finish a sentence for them, how do you get them to, embrace their own writing and not be like, well, the computer clearly writes a better sentence than I do. Why don't I just use ChatGPT to do it? I think you're still muted, Kelly. There you go.
The elementary, middle, they don't know what that is yet, and I haven't seen the older kids use it. I learned about it last year, and I'm terrified. But no, as soon as they know that they can use a crazy voice, and they're really fun voices on Macs, they will write for you. We give them very narrow topics, just to get them. We just are trying to teach them to use the tools. It's not so much about what a product is, just to get them to engage.
Wonderful. And so Brian, word clouds, slides with friends, in lectures as a knowledge check. It's open-ended, so they just drop in one word. Is that right, Brian? To just sort of say, this is what I'm understanding.
Yeah, they can do one word or just write it in there. I'm sure there's a character limit, but they can go up to a couple of sentences. So it's just a more nice open-ended way of doing it.
Oh, so you can see the wrong answers in the word cloud. You can also see how many students are giving you the wrong answer. Yeah, because it's bigger.
Which is great, because I'll ask things like, here's the conditions we're seeing. What kind of hearing loss would come out of that? And sometimes you'll get completely out of left field answers. And then you can take that and be like, okay, let's go step by step and see where the logic broke down. And it really seems to help the group. Other people would be like, oh yeah, I was thinking that too. And I'm like, okay, well, here's why we don't go off that branch. Here's why we go off this branch. So it's a lot of fun.
What a lovely idea, the idea of it as a cloud, which really suggests that there are lots of different ideas and some of them are more right than others, but it's just like this, like we're thinking this thought together rather than if they come up one at a time, each person's little guess or their thoughts, it just feels more vulnerable by itself, surrounded by white space. But if it's like in a cloud, this is all of us thinking together and some of us have got the right answers, some of us are a little off. I can see how that's so much better than someone being like, let me risk to see if I've got the right answer. Because the only one who's going to do that is the one who's pretty sure they're right. And that doesn't really help the others sort of do that, that task of asking for recall, like, which we know that sort of recall training is so powerful for learning. Really fun. And then Chad, you create games, pick up pennies off the table while wearing gloves. Can you remind us again what you teach?
So I create online learning modules for health profession students.
Mm-hmm.
So very few games these days, but I've taught at Portland State in their public health program.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. So what does SDOH stand for?
Social determinants of health.
Uh-huh. So how hard is it to pick up a penny if you're having different gloves? What a lovely idea. And are they into it? Do they seem to like that activity a lot, do you think?
Yeah, especially the more competitive students would really get into it. And then what I think was additional unintended learning as part of this was some of the students had figured workarounds that made them pick up more pennies, but they bruised some of the rules that were established. And then we had a talk, this happened just the one time, but then there was this class discussion about how there's like black markets and, gray markets and how that's a way that some cultures have had to work around the system that is working against them. So.
Awesome. Just that sort of a simulation, but one where everyone feels safe. It's really great. Thanks, Michelle. Case analysis, case studies are something that folks always overlook because you think, well, it's a case study, but that's really authentic learning, and it's asking them to engage with a real authentic situation or a simulated authentic situation where they actually have to apply their learning, and there's opportunities for negotiating about what's the best answer and why is that the right answer and what might a different answer be. And I just feel like there's not quite enough like support out there for using case studies and case study analysis and comparison. And using an image to describe the emotion of the client. Awesome. So they just pick one and then they say, this is how I feel like the client was feeling. Is that right, Michelle? Could you offer any clarification to what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, it's very much what our clinicians will draw upon. So often they get stuck in a very linear space of thinking where it's all about the symptomatology of the client, and they're looking at the diagnostic fields for the clinical case analysis. And so sometimes the imagery will move them into more of an emotional space, and to be able to broaden that perspective of what this client's lived experience has been, it brings in a different layer of compassion and conversation that draws upon intersectionality, as Chad was sharing earlier, and thinking about where clients are coming from into that space with the people that they're working with in healthcare.
Awesome. So wonderful. Great. So did anyone have anything to share that didn't get shared? I know we're actually a minute over time, so I don't want to keep you past. I will direct you to, and you'll have access to this in the slides again, but we've started a Google Doc with lots of ideas that other folks have, of different active learning techniques, some for opening, some for closing, some for integrating into lectures. And this is one I invite you to contribute to. It's an open educational resource. You can add to it, you could share it, whatever you want to do. I'm seeing rose and thorn there. And in my class, I just ended up doing berries and thorns because I'm like, it's like the season. I'm thinking about blackberries. I'm thinking about raspberries. All the blackberries taking over my yard, but right now I can actually get a little sweetness out of them when the rest of the year it's all thorns. But right now there's some berries there. So that just made me laugh about that. So please feel free to share, contribute if you'd like. And then at the last end of the slide, there are links to lots of other further resources about active learning. The cheat sheet is kind of great. This is the OER that we've built. And then this whole book by James Lang is really very wonderful. Why Students Can't Focus and What You Can Do About It. So, all right, thanks everyone. I won't keep you beyond. I really appreciate that you were here. Don't be a stranger. September 20th is our pedagogy speed date. It's really fun. It'll be here in person on Forest Grove campus. There will be food, there will be wine, there will be lots of fun conversation. It's a pretty fun time, very social event. You can meet some other colleagues or share time with them. And then from there, we'll have our pedagogy after hours series. Each person will be presenting. And our friend Brian Greenaway will be one of our presenters, talking about student created podcasts for audiology. So y'all should come. Wonderful. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Robbie.
Sure.